Hello, hello, everybody. Sorry for the delay. I don't know what happened with this Zoom thing. I must have, did I give you the wrong link or something?
Yeah,
We only had the link from last week.
Oh, that was my mistake. Okay, I apologize for that too, and I apologize for the mix up with the due date, but that you can still submit it till later today, till about noon or so. So that should be taken care of. So anyway, I gave you the answer. I think basically with Chat GPT, it's okay to rely on it, but in some way, like indicate to the reader that you have looked at it. You want to you want to disclose that you're using it as a source. You don't want to just copy it. That's not a good idea. And also, when you do an assignment, try to read the material like before you answer. I know like a lot of people kind of scan it and look for answers, but your answer is going to be a lot better if you read the material carefully. I guess that's sort of obvious, but not everybody did that. So anyway, I apologize for both things. I don't know what's going on. I've been traveling, so I'm a little bit discombobulated, but today we're going to discuss, I was, last time I was talking about emotional labor and emotions at work and the Smile Factory, which is the case study you guys did for the discussion board last night, kind of covers that. Can anyone summarize to me what the Smile Factory is about and what it depicts? Any volunteers? Nobody? Anybody? Nobody? How about Elizabeth?
Based on the reading, it was more about how the employees, how they are picked out, selected specifically, how they do their day to day, their emotional, how it affects them emotionally, how they have to behave, and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's part of it certainly, and also the nature of the control systems in Disney. Part of it is the surveillance, which a lot of people mention, and part of it's also the peer pressure, that they behave in certain ways because of the peer pressure, but also that they have to seem a certain way at all times. And part of that is the customers themselves are a kind of control mechanism. If the players don't kind of meet the expectations of the customers, they're gonna, complain about it or make an issue out of it. So basically, there a lot of the stress working at Disney is related to the emotional content of the job, and Disney's definitely got a strong culture. That's true in the park, but it's also true even at the corporate office and elsewhere around the company. They've got a very strong pattern of interaction, and this has contributed to their long-term success. So basically, I asked people, what are some of the rewards that the Disney people enjoy from their activity, from their work. Who can tell us that? David?
Yeah, so the disease employee they could sometimes get discounts on like the stuff in the park, like
Mhm.
maybe, and sometimes they could get free admissions to the park.
Yeah.
And
The biggest thing, of course, is that they make a lot of friends and they party a lot. It's like a social interaction.
yeah,
And
they socialize and they connect with each other and
yeah. So
make
it's kind of a job, but it's also like a kind of a lifestyle. And it's like an extension of like going to a party school. Brooklyn doesn't do that because we're more of a commuter campus, but a lot of colleges are like party schools and fraternities and all that kind of thing. And Disney's kind of like that. I think that's a lot of what they get out of it. So basically, a lot of, I think what this case kind of outlines is the hugely psychological nature of a lot of work today. And I have little doubt that that's going to continue in importance. And a big part of that is the emotional content. So the management of your emotions and your emotional intelligence, which we were talking about last time, are all really important. So basically, I think what this case kind of signals is, although it was written a long time ago, it kind of signals where work is going. What we're going to be dealing with more and more is the emotional component of work. And so we need to develop those kinds of competencies, basically. And I don't think that we always get that in school. I think, if you take some classes in sales, that's probably going to help you a lot in the future. But the having the right answer, that if you can copy something from Chat GPT and fool me, it kind of tells you anyone can do that. So you're basically not adding a lot of value. And so, if that's all you can do, if that's all you've learned from school, you're not really prepared to add a lot of value. And instead, what you need to be thinking about is, how do I learn to manage myself so that I'm more creative and more able to help other people with their problems, and help other people with their emotional component. The Disney people do it on a small level, but any kind of work in the future is going to have that element to a large extent. Okay, so basically I thought today we've kind of done a lot of the stuff on emotions at work. I thought today I would cover a little bit more about writing issues. And so, but before I do that, I'll take the attendance. Syed,
Here, Professor.
hello. Okay. And that's Syed Abbas, Syed Ahmad,
Here, Professor.
hello. Samima,
Good morning.
good morning. Alessandro,
Good morning.
good morning. David,
yeah. Good morning, Professor.
morning. Annam,
Good morning, Professor.
hey. Melissa,
Here, good morning.
Morning. Winston,
Good morning, Professor.
good morning. Ben,
Good morning, Professor.
good morning. Kai. Kai,
Here.
hello, okay. Ben, Kai, Ji Rui,
Good morning.
good morning. Farhan. Brianna,
Here.
hello. Steve Feng,
Here.
hello. Jonathan Gonzalez,
Here.
hello. June Grant,
Here.
hello. Ming Hao,
Here.
hello. Angelica. Gian,
Here.
hello. Leon. Leon? Okay, Elizabeth,
Here.
hello. Rochelle, Rochelle. Did I hear? I think I heard that. Demi,
I'm here.
okay. Just to check, is Rochelle here? Did I get you? Rochelle? Okay, it sounds like it's sort of muffled, but I get it. Cameron,
I'm here.
okay. Nicholas, Neglia,
Here. Good morning.
morning. Aquino,
I'm here.
hello. Jenny. Jenny. Jenny Perfecto. Chenille. Chenille Powell,
I'm here, I'm sorry.
hello Chenille.
Here.
Anna,
Good morning, Professor.
good morning. Wenjin,
Here.
hello. Jaren. Jaren Walls. UN. UN is not here. Kristen,
Hi, good morning, Professor.
good morning, Kristen. Anita Zhao,
Here.
hello. And last but not least, Jinran May. Jinran. Okay, I'm just going to repeat the ones that didn't answer. If you're here, let me know. Farhan, Angelica, Leon, Jenny. Oh no, Jenny. And Yiwen.
Here.
Yiwen is here.
No, Jenny.
Oh, Jenny. Okay. Let me go back. Jenny. Okay. All right. So a number of issues with writing, I see over and over again, and one of them is you should never have a plural verb if there's a singular noun. So like sometimes people mix the number. I may have gone over this already, but it doesn't hurt to repeat it. So for example, a lot of I see this over and over again, and I do it sometimes too, to be honest. So if you say the boy with his friends run away. Okay. This is wrong because the subject is the boy. Okay, with his friends is a modifier. And so the number of run should match boy, not friends. And so you have to say runs away. And a lot of people get fooled by the number of the modifying phrase that follows the noun. I do sometimes myself, so I can understand why you would, but be careful of that. And always like check the verb and the noun. Do they match in terms of singular and plural? Another issue which is really complicated is how to use commas. Now, I've told you already that the length of a sentence should be average about 15 words. And so every time you start a sentence, you should capitalize the first letter of the new sentence. The sentence should end in a period, and there should be 15 between 1 and say 35 words. If there's 50 words, it's not that you committed a crime, but you should triple check to make sure that you're not saying too much in one sentence. The sentence could be correct with 50 words, but it could probably be shorter, and it's probably better to make it shorter. So you want to, even if the sentence is 25 words, you want to double check that you can't say it just as well with 15 words or 10 words. So in other words, one of the basic rules in writing is that you want to use as few words as possible. Now, sentences shouldn't be too complex for the idea they're conveying. If you write a complicated material, like say you're writing about a physics textbook, or you're writing about philosophy or something, it's sometimes difficult to convey a single idea without using a lot of words. And, that can be forgivable, but usually in business, you don't need a lot of words to convey a single thought. And so it's probably better to use one main clause per sentence. And you might have a subordinate clause, and you might have a second main clause, but usually one main clause. So that means you can usually limit your sentences to about 15 words or less. If it goes over, that's not a big issue, but you should look at your writing and say, are my sentences running 35, 40 words? Now, one reason that might happen, and again, it's not a crime, but it's probably better not to do it, is if you write a lot of long lists. Lists are usually not a good idea. It's better to say things succinctly by sentences rather than try to cram everything into a list. But one of the basic principles of writing lists is called parallelism. I may have talked about this already. If I have, forgive me, but it doesn't hurt to relearn it. Parallelism or parallel structure means that every word, every term in a list has the same structure. So you say something like, I went to school, I went to work, I went home, I went to sleep. Okay, that's fine. These are all basically the same structure. One deviation is that you have two of the sentences have the modifiers, the infinitive modifiers after when three of the four sentences, I mean, but one has an object. That's a small difference. It's not important enough to worry about. But you could say, for example, I went to my house, or I went to my home. you could say. But I went home is fine. So these each follow more or less the same grammatical form. But if you say, I like school, I dislike working, I am a traveler, I went to sleep. Each of these has a different form, and so it becomes jarring for the reader to absorb because the form throws people off. So you don't want to use this kind of different form in a list. So if you have 2 or 3 items in a list, you like say, I like to go to school, and I like to go to work. I like to go to school. I like to go to work. Okay, and that has a flow. Whereas if you use different form, the most famous one I may have mentioned already was when Julius Caesar said, I came, I saw, I conquered. Okay, it's got a flow. That's why we still remember that phrase, and people still use it. Now, one of the big things that people get wrong is how to use commas, and it's really hard to absorb everything at once, but it's really not that hard. I mean, a lot of this material is very easy and can be learned without too much effort if you apply yourself. So basically, if you spend a half hour a day for a year, you will have most of this. I know that a lot of people have ESL issues, but the grammatical part, the writing part isn't that hard to learn once you've gotten the tenses and the English. For many of you, that's a big challenge, and I appreciate that. That's another story. But basically, when you write a sentence, the subordinate clause starts with a subordinating conjunction, which would be when, because, while. So any joining word that a verb can follow is a conjunction. And when you start a sentence with a subordinate clause, you should insert a comma at the end. While I was sleeping, the storm was loud. Okay, you insert a comma after the subordinate clause, but you don't do it when the subordinate clause follows. So the storm was loud while I was sleeping. You don't insert the comma. Okay, there. You insert commas when there's a modifying phrase that is not essential, that it doesn't change the meaning of the sentence. A lot of people get this wrong, but it's not hard to learn. So if you have a modifier that's important to the meaning of the sentence, so if you say the man whom Holmes saw was the killer, you omit the commas before and after whom Holmes saw, because if you put them in, it's saying that Holmes didn't really care that the man was the killer. If you leave them out, what that's saying is that whom Holmes saw is important to the meaning of the sentence. And so you leave out the commas because you're describing the one man who really matters. And of course, if he's the killer, then that's an important point. So you leave out the commas. And that's the same is true if you're adding information about somebody that doesn't describe that doesn't define who they are. If it just describes them, then you insert the commas. So the player um what was his name? The baseball player, Barry Bonds, who hit the most home runs, right? I hope I'm right about that. Most career home runs. Okay. The player who hit the most career home runs was Bonds. Okay, so basically you're defining the player you're talking about, and so you omit the commas. Who hit the most career home runs is defining a single player. There's not multiple players who hit the most career home runs. So basically you leave out the commas. On the other hand, if you've already defined Bonds and you mention his name and you want to tell people a little bit about him, then you add a not what's called a non-restrictive clause. Bonds, who hit the most career home runs, is the player. Okay, kind of lame sentence, but basically that's the idea. So you insert this modifying stuff that's just describing Bonds. It doesn't change the meaning. Bonds is the player. It's still saying that Bonds is the player, but you're just adding information about Bonds. You're not changing the meaning of the sentence. So basically, then you insert the commas. The museum, which is on 81st and 5th, is called the Metropolitan Museum. Okay, so basically, again, this is called a non-restrictive relative clause. When you're modifying a noun with the words which or that, and you're just adding information about the noun, the museum is called the Metropolitan Museum of Art. You're just adding some information about the museum. You insert commas before and after. Okay, so as you see, some of these rules are a little bit subtle, but they're really not difficult to learn. You just need to focus on learning them, and you can pick it up pretty quickly. One of the big mistakes that people make, let me think for a second. Okay, another thing I may have talked about already, but it's extremely important. Learning how to use apostrophes correctly. A lot of people get these wrong, and so you should work on that and always check your use of apostrophes. So, for example, apostrophes. Apostrophes. Okay, sorry about that. Apostrophes are meant to show possession, and they're also meant to show association. So if you say, for instance, the girl's house is big, okay, you're saying that the girl owns the house. If you say the girl's house is big, that's incorrect because this is a plural. It's not, it doesn't indicate possession. Now, what a lot of people do is they simply leave out the possessive form altogether. And that's becoming more common, but it's still a little bit awkward at times. So if you say, for instance, the Disney culture is intense, that's okay, because the Disney culture, when you use the word Disney in association with culture, you're using it as what's called an attributive noun. And an attributive noun means that you're using the name Disney as a modifier. You're treating it as an adjective. And there's nothing wrong with that. But there's limits to how you can use nouns as modifiers. For instance, you don't say the girl house is big. The girl house would be used in certain specific circumstances. For instance, if there are two houses and you've already got a clear picture in your mind that there's a boy house and a girl house, and you want to say the girl house, you might use that kind of construction. But in general, if you just want to talk about possession, that the house belongs to the girl, you can't use this. You have to use the possessive. And there are a lot of times when the possessive is still the best form. Just I admit, and it's true, that the attributive form has become increasingly popular. And so it's more and more acceptable to just use the attributive noun rather than the possessive. But I think it's still important to master the possessive form, because at times it'll be very awkward if you use a construction like the girl's house is big and you don't use an apostrophe. So one of the big areas, and a lot of people don't get this at all, is the verbals. And we can spend a lot of time on this. I urge you to read up on some of this on your own, because you're not going to learn it just from a session or two that I give you. And I know a lot of people haven't had this. I don't know why, but they don't teach a lot of it in school. So basically, a verbal is a verb that's been transformed into another type of form of another part of speech. So, for example, the parts of speech are nouns, verbs, adjectives, and prepositions. Okay, and basically, verbs can be, and adverbs, I'm sorry. I meant to say adverbs, not prepositions, but that's another part of speech. You could also say conjunctions, or also. But the thing is, verbs can be turned into nouns, adjectives, or adverbs. Okay, so we do this all the time. And so verbs have this kind of flexibility that you can use them as nouns, you can use them as adjectives, you can use them as adverbs. And just to distinguish among these, verbs are action words. There's words like go and run and play and fly. Those are all verbs. Nouns refer to entities, so they're names. So it could be like the house, the car, or it could be a proper noun, such as Professor Langbert or Anita Zhao or Kristen. So all of these are nouns. There would be proper nouns, which actual people's names, or Brooklyn College would be a proper noun. Or nouns could also just be general objects at the table, the computer. Adjectives are descriptive words. So when you describe a noun, you use an adjective. So the big table, the big computer, the Apple computer. That the Apple computer is where you're using an attributive noun. It's Apple Corporation, and you're describing your computer as an apple. It's an apple. So you're using the corporate name as an adjective. That's called an attributive noun. Okay, you're using the adjective, you're using the noun as an adjective. Prepositions are like joining words, so it would be like to, at, by, and they're always followed by nouns, never by verbs. Okay, so by the stream, at the river, in the class, those are all prepositions. Okay, by, at, in. The class is a noun, the river is a noun, the stream is a noun. Adverbs are words that describe verbs or adjectives. So if you say, and by the way, I always tell people not to do this, but I'm going to show you anyway the wrong thing. So if you say the very big house, okay, very is an adjective, but what I tell people is never to use that kind of adjective. So let me just digress for a second. When you write English, you want to use as few adjectives as possible. I'm not saying not to use adjectives and not to use adverbs. Adverbs less than adjectives. You want to use as few adverbs as possible. So you want to limit your use of adjectives, and even more so, limit your use of adverbs. So words like very, totally, extremely, quite, these kind of words, the quite happy boy. What does that tell you? When we talk, we use this kind of word, we fumble around a little and we use these kind of words. But when you write, you gotta clean that out. You know, writing in English should be crisp, clean, to the point, and use very few words. The fewer words, the better. Okay. And so, I mean, this is, you know, if you read Zenser on writing well, that's the first thing he talks about. If you read Elements of Style by Strunk and White, you know, what White says is in his introduction, if I recall, is that when he took English with Strunk would say, remove the word, get as few words as possible, remove the word. And so basically, if you can say something in 2 words that you're using 3 words to say, remove the unnecessary word. You want to use few words, and words like very mean almost nothing. I mean, what's the difference between a big house and a very big house? It might mean something to you, but to the listener, they may have a different frame of reference, and very only has meaning if there's a frame of reference. So when you get, you know, praised by your boss and they say good, very good, or excellent, that, you know, that has some meaning because it's quantitative. But when you're talking loosely, the word very adds very little. Or if you say the quite big house, what does that really mean? You know, it makes you sound fancy, like you're having you're an English aristocrat. You know, you say the quite big this or the quite that, you know, but basically it doesn't really mean anything. So you can just throw it out. So basically, words like adjectives and adverbs, you want to use as little as possible. Conjunctions, again, are joining words that are parallel to prepositions, but the difference between prepositions and conjunctions is that prepositions are followed by a noun only, whereas conjunctions are followed by everything, including a verb. So, you know, you have a verb after a conjunction, but not after a preposition. You can have nouns after conjunctions too, like you say, while the boy slept, the wolf prowled. Okay, the boy slept is a clause, and you're allowed to do that because while is a subordinated conjunction. If you say with or at the boy slept, it's wrong because at is a preposition, so a verb cannot follow. One of the big times there's a problem with using verbs after prepositions is the word like. In our everyday speech, it's acceptable to use like as a conjunction, but in writing, you don't want to do that. The like is technically a preposition. You would say, well, that sense doesn't make any slept. So you wouldn't say like the boy slept, the mother slept. Okay, you would say as the boy slept, the mother slept. Okay, so basically you use as when a verb follows. You use like when a noun follows. And this is one of the big confusions in everyone does this, not just, students. I do it too. But the thing is, you want to be careful when you're writing. You want to use like as a preposition and as a conjunction. So getting back to the verbals, all right, so I had a few digressions and I started talking about, so I talked about the parts of speech, nouns, name, things, verbs are action words, adjectives describe nouns, prepositions are joining words that join a noun, adverbs describe adjectives or verbs, and conjunctions are joining words that include at least a verb, at least one verb. So basically, what I was saying is that verbs are very flexible. They're basically action words, but they can be turned into other forms of speech very easily. And the way you do that is by forming a verbal. All right. Now, OWL has a very good, the online writing lab of Purdue has an excellent discussion of verbals. And there are three kinds of verbals. Infinitives, gerunds, and participles. Okay, and basically infinitives can function as nouns, adjectives, or adverbs. Gerunds can function are nouns and participles are adjectives. Okay, so if you look at Shakespeare's famous to be or not to be, remember Hamlet. To be is functioning as a noun. To be is the question. To be or not to be, comma. That is the question. You could also, I think, better. Well, yeah, you can use a comma to set this apart. It's kind of an introductory phrase, so you can use a comma there. That is the question, is the main clause. To be or not to be is basically the subject of the sentence. To be or not to be is the question. So it's functioning as a noun. The best aim in life is to be happy. Okay, so basically to be happy, to be is an infinitive, and it's functioning as a noun. You're saying that it's the best aim in life. You could say, my favorite friend is Frank. Frank is a noun. Similarly, the best aim in life is to be happy. To be happy is a noun. And you've turned the verb to be into a noun by using the infinitive form. Okay. Secondly, gerunds are, you use them all the time, are verbs that are turned into nouns by adding ing. So running is fun. Sleeping is more fun. Exercising is healthy. Okay. You could also say exercise is healthy. Okay, these are all, not exercise is healthy. And I'm just saying that exercising is healthy means the same thing as exercise is healthy. They're both nouns, exercise and exercising. You've turned the verbs into nouns by adding ing. Okay. And finally, you could say, the running boy tripped. Okay, running describes boy, so it's an adjective. Okay, when you do that, that's called a participle. So participles are adjectives, whereas gerunds are nouns. And you have to deal with their having the same form. English is not an easy language. So basically they have the same form. And so if you say running is fun, running is a noun. But if you say the running boy tripped, it's an adjective. So when you say running is fun, you're basically describing you're describing running. Running is the subject. Here, running, when you say the running boy, running functions as an adjective. All right. And that distinction is sometimes important. So let's say you want to use a gerund as the subject of a sentence. So you say running is fun, running is healthy. Okay, so the subject of the sentence running is a gerund because it turns run into a noun. Now, let's say you want to make clear that it's not just that running is healthy, but the patient's who runs is doing something healthy. In that case, you change the subject, you call this the subject of the gerund. The patient's running, you use the possessive form. This gets me back to what I started with, which is the use of the apostrophe. That when you use a gerund and you want to say who is doing the action that the gerund indicates, and remember the gerund is a noun, and so you can't modify a noun with another noun. If you leave out the apostrophe s, which a lot of people do, and a lot of people in the class do this, then what you're really saying is that the patient who happens to be running is healthy. So you're basically making the subject the patient, and you say the patient who happens to be running is healthy. So you're not saying anything about the running, you're just saying that the patient happens to be healthy. So if you say the patient running is healthy, what you're saying is that the patient is healthy and the patient happens to be running. Whereas you're basically saying two sentences. The patient is healthy and the patient happens to be running. And you're shortening it by using running as an adjective. However, if you want to say that in general, it's the running that's healthy, then you have to use the apostrophe S. Now, a lot of the time it doesn't matter. And you might say, oh, I'm just harping on details. But the simple truth is that there were definitely times, many times, when this distinction could mean two diametrically opposite meanings. And the result can be miscommunication. So these distinctions, well, you might say it's boring, or I'm wasting your time, or it's not that interesting, or we should have had this already, or the thing is, though, like when you make a business deal, you need to be totally clear as to what the terms of the deal are. And the more clear you are, the more successful the contract is going to be. And so if you'd say that the patient is healthy, so therefore we'll write the insurance, that means one thing. But if you say the running is healthy and the patient happens to be running, so we won't write the insurance, that's something entirely different. So basically, this at times can mean very, very different things. And this temptation to be careless about it can result in severe repercussions. I once spoke to a guy named Ken Pasternak, who developed one of the biggest apartment buildings in Jersey City. And he told me that when his firm and the other parties wrote up the contract to build the building, the contract they wrote was literally 1,000 pages long. Their contract was 1,000 pages long. And the people who wrote that contract had to be extremely specific about every little item on the list. And this is part of business. I mean, this is not incidental. This is what you're interested in business. This is a lot of what business is like when you make a deal, you have to be really specific. And to be specific, you need to get the adjectives right. If you don't do that, and that's why the corporations put a lot of weight on clear writing. One of the famous things about Warren Buffett is that he does a lot of clear writing. Okay, so far I've talked about, I've kind of overwhelmed you guys with stuff probably, but I've talked about differences among the three verbals, infinitives, participles, and gerunds. And I said that participles are adjectives, gerunds are nouns, and infinitives can be nouns, adverbs, or adjectives. So basically, now I'm going to do a little bit more on commas before we go. And commas are the hardest punctuation. I think semicolons are not understood by most people, but they're not hard to learn. There's basically one use for semicolons, which is to join two main clauses. I talked about that already. So basically, if you say the house is red, the barn is blue. Okay, you're joining two main clauses with a semicolon. If you want to turn that into a into a complex sentence, you could say, well, the barn is blue, the house is red. And when a subordinate clause starts a sentence, you insert a comma. I also said that if you use a noun as a non-essential modifier after another noun, or not just a noun, any word or phrase as a non-essential modifier after another noun, then you insert commas before and after it. The barn, which is blue, stands next to the red house. Okay, which is blue is a relative clause. You're modifying the barn, and it's called a non-restrictive relative clause because you're not changing the meaning of the sentence. It's just like I said before. You're saying the barn stands next to the red house. By adding the relative clause, sorry, which is blue, you're adding information about the barn. Therefore, you insert commas before it and after it. Now, as an aside to that, when you write a non-restrictive relative clause, you should introduce it, you should use which. When you restrict, when the relative clause defines the noun that precedes it, you should use that. So you say, the barn that I painted blue stands next to the red house. There's only, let's say there's two barns. One is you painted blue, the other you painted orange. Then this relative clause that I painted blue restricts the meaning of the word barn to the one that you painted blue. And so you're identifying, you could say the same thing. The player who led the league in home runs was Bonds. Okay, so basically you're defining one player out of the universe of players. So you omit the commas. If you have already identified the player, so you're not defining who the player is, then you are adding information about Bonds. I think he hit was it 762 or something? So whatever it is, so so you could say hit 762 home runs. So basically, if you're adding information, then you put commas before and after the relative clause. Now, a relative clause is a clause. Remember, clauses contain a verb that starts either with a relative pronoun like that, which wherever, whomever, or that starts with words like who, where, and it modifies the noun that precedes it. The house where I grew up. Okay. The boy who played baseball. Okay, so these are all relative clauses. And so the key is that it relates to the preceding noun. I've used the words who and whom, and a lot of people don't get those. It's kind of easy to learn. I recommend you master that. And the way you remember that is straightforward. If you can say he, then use who. If you can say him, then use whom. So you say, who is the best dancer? Okay, is he the best dancer? Okay, you can use he instead of who. You saw him. Instead, you might say you saw whom. Okay, whom is the object, who is the subject. So if you can replace he with who, then use who. If sometimes people use whom incorrectly because they want to sound fancy, but it's not a matter of being fancy. It's just that whom is an object, whereas who is a subject. One point where that can get confusing, and I know I'm giving you information overload, but you can go back and read about this stuff, and at least I'm pointing to you that you should be thinking about how to improve in some of these areas. And we all can. I can too. I didn't learn a lot of this in school either. I taught myself. I'm relaying to you stuff I've learned through self education. And you can educate yourselves too. So basically, if you use what's called a noun clause as a subject, so for instance, the boy who went to the moon. Okay, well, that's not a noun clause. That's basically a relative clause. But because who is the subject of this relative clause, you use who because it's the subject of the clause. You use who when it's the subject. If you say the boy whom the teacher admired, then you use whom because it's the object of admired. Okay, so this applies. It also, when you use, for instance, if you say he who is best finishes first. Okay, he who is best is a subject. Okay, it's functioning as a clause that's functioning as a noun. It's a clause that's functioning as a noun. So you use who because it's the subject of is. So you have to be careful when you use who or whom. Make sure you're using the right form in the clause where it's embedded. And you want to look carefully at the clause that contains who and whom in order to decide whether to use the form. If you say the boy who the teacher admired, it's wrong because the way you can tell is to put who after admired. The boy, the teacher admired who. Okay, you wouldn't say that. So basically, if you have one of these constructions where the object precedes the clause, the subject precedes the clause. So the teacher admired whom? The object. Yeah, the object precedes the clause. So you want to reverse it and then see how it sounds to you. Because who is the object, you would use whom. And a lot of students get that wrong. I know it's not, in speech, it's not a big issue. There are times when it can sound very awkward especially if you use whom wrong, but and a lot of times people use it wrong because they're trying to sound fancy, and then they get messed up. Now, one last thing, we're almost out of time. and I'm sorry to overload you with all this English stuff, but I can't emphasize enough that if you're planning to go into any kind of corporate work, law, accounting, computer programming, and just because, I've had students say to me, oh, I'm going to be an accountant, I don't need to know how to write. My friends, accountants need to write every day. They write opinion letters, they write letters to clients, they write recommendations. So you don't get away from writing just because what you're doing involves a lot of mathematics. Mathematicians have to write too. And so basically everybody needs to do this. And the more you strengthen these skills, the more marketable you're going to be. Now, one last point before I let you go. A lot of students have trouble drafting their resumes. And, if you want, when you do your cover letters, your resumes, you write informational interview letters, if you want, I can help proofread them and go over some of it. And basically, you need to learn how to do that on your own. That's very, very important. I see I lost a few students. That's okay. I mean, if you were bored, I can understand it. But the thing is, if you don't learn this, you're going to be at a disadvantage. I'm sorry. It's just the factual thing. So the trick is, if I put you to sleep today, that's okay. But what you want to do is then go back and say, I need to learn the things he put me to sleep over. So I'm going to take a look at Elements of Style by Strunk and White. I'm going to look at a grammar book, and there were a lot of great introductory grammar books, and start to learn this stuff so I can master it. I was at a career seminar on Sunday that Andre Fontenelle puts on, which I recommend attending if you haven't attended it. And he showed a resume that somebody had done years ago, and it was filled with spelling errors, grammatical errors, all kinds of mistakes. An employer who sees that it's not going to be a selling point. They're going to worry about it. So keep that in mind. And it's a big part of marketing yourself that you want to improve in these areas. I'm not saying you're going to master everything overnight, but you should be working. I've had students who went out in the world. I had one guy who wrote to me about 5 years after he had me, and he was an ESL student, by the way, and his writing was like completely different from what it was, and he wrote me a memo and it was perfect, really perfect. And I said, wow, that's really amazing. He said he was doing really well. He's working for a hospital, and he was moving up and so on. So this is the point, that you want to be able to improve. Okay. All right. So that said, I apologize. I have to fix the other classes. You are, a Zoom thing also. So basically, I'll see you next Monday. I'll send around, I'll get your discussion board grades in today or tomorrow. And I apologize for both mistakes, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you, Professor. Have a good one.
You're welcome. Take care, Kristen. Be well.
Have a good day, Professor.
You too.